an equity scorecard that we created at the Firstborn and More Model Office. And so I'll just be giving a little bit of background about that. It's going to be me. I am the director of the Firstborn and More Model Office here at Santa Fe Community College. My name is Tekla Johnson, and I've been doing home visiting work for 24 years. I'm also here with Andrea Sladopolsky and Mireya Schumacher will be doing the majority of the presentation. They're both contractors here at the model office, and both have experience as either leadership in home visiting or a home visitor, and can tell you more about themselves. And also in the PowerPoint, you'll see a little bit more about their history and background and identities. So Mireya, if you can start the share on the PowerPoint, that would be great. And we are going to be presenting about this scorecard review. So basically, I want to just give a little bit of background. Many of you were with us earlier this week as we talked about the process of having parents create curriculum. And the other sort of equity project we've been undertaking recently is this scorecard review. And so going to the next slide, I'm just going to give a couple of our whys behind this. So basically I've been, and all of us at the model office, one of our core values is equity and really everyone being welcome. So we've been participating in many different nationwide looks at equity and how to make early childhood more welcoming to everyone. And if you can get it to the next slide, Mireya, it'll kind of give a little bit about our whys. Thank you. So I was in a meeting last year where I came across an equity scorecard for a STEAM curriculum. It was created out of NYU. And I looked at that and I thought, oh, how cool. That would be so fun to do with our curriculum. We had edited and revised our curriculum back in 2019 when the model first came to Santa Fe Community College. And we had been thoughtful around imaging and changing some of the wording, but I knew we had further to go. So I thought that I would create this work group, which Andrea and Mireya led and worked on with other folks who were all either home visiting professionals, early childhood folks, or parents, or both, maybe. So they'll tell you more about that group and what they did. But really, the idea behind this was it really aligns with the Firstborn and More core value of equity and really everyone being welcome. And that's always been one of my favorite parts of Firstborn is that it's one of the few home visiting or maybe only home visiting models that really is for everyone. It is universal. It's intended to be implemented universally in a community. So there's no specific risk factor, and I think we can say everyone welcome, but that we have to do a lot of work to make that a reality, that everyone feels really welcomed, regardless of the type of family they have, regardless of their identities, their lived experiences. And so we're constantly working through our staff training and onboarding of new home visitors and through our curriculum to have people experience the people in this program and the curriculum that we share as fully welcoming. And that is an ongoing process of increased awareness and making changes and continuing to learn as we go through that. So we went through this to live with the core values, to really support home visitors in the field, and to make sure that really everyone feels that they have access to this curriculum, because we really want positive outcomes for families and children. And the only way I think to do that is to make sure that everyone feels welcome. And there's a lot of work to be done to ensure that happens. So I will turn it over now to Andrea and Mireya for them to talk about how this process happened and for you to learn more about it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mireya Schumacher, and I was a part of this whole process from the beginning to the very end. And I will be presenting a little bit on the actual process that we followed and also on our review committee that we put together. So the process that we decided to follow to review our curriculum is we adapted a tool. So the tool that Tekla mentioned. I will go ahead and introduce it a little bit more in depth in the next slide. And then we went ahead and put a review committee together, and we were pretty mindful in finding a review committee that was pretty diverse, we think, as diverse and people that were somehow knowledgeable in this area already. And we also then divided the curriculum up in a way that made sense to review in chunks at a time. So then after we all individually reviewed our pieces of curriculum, we would get together and have conversations about it. And these conversations were just so enlightening and so rich. It was really where a lot of the meat of this happened. And then we put a report together, and then we made this. I just realized something. And then we made this presentation to present to you all. And then the next step will be revising the curriculum. So from our findings, what meaningful changes can we make to the curriculum so that it is more equitable and inclusive? And that's really the goal of this whole process. And the whole process, took just under 3 months, I want to say. And when you think about it, we did kind of a lot in just 3 months. So here's the tool we used. So, we want to credit this tool that was created by Leah Q. Peoples, Tahia Islam, and Timothy Davis. And it was created for the Metropolitan Center for Research on Equity and the Transformation of Schools in the New York and NYU Metro Center. So this evaluation tool was created for teachers, administrators, parents, and students to determine whether their schools' attempts to be inclusive were or were not successful. Like, were they culturally responsive or were they culturally damaging? And, mind you, this is a tool, as we learned, this is a tool that assesses something different than a home visiting curriculum. When you think about the frequency that a school meets, when you think about, the length of time, it's just a little more intensive sometimes. But yeah, so this was kind of our starting point. And the first step was we revised the tool. I revised the tool. And the first thing I did was went through each statement and changed a lot of the language that was STEAM focused, more of that STEAM jargon, STEAM concepts, and really applied it to early childhood and parenting. The tool assesses 3 areas of equity: representation, social justice, and materials and resources shared. And yeah, I think, when you look at some of these statements, they're pretty ambitious, I think. They're very, in a really good way. So the curriculum acknowledges and or incorporates the expertise of diverse communities, their cultures, and their historical and contemporary experience. The curriculum elevates not just researchers, medical providers, and developmental experts, but the everyday applications of early childhood development. So, all of these statements are statements that we aspire our curriculum to model, to share, to stand for. And what we realized is that this tool really served as a jumping off point to elicit feedback from our review committee. It gave it structure. So rather than meeting with our review committee and saying, hey, what do you think about the curriculum? Do you think it's equitable? And just making it this broader statement, it really narrowed it in on specifics of what we were looking at. Oops. So next, I would like to recognize and thank our review committee and let you all know who made up our review committee. So we've got Jess Clark, who has done or is doing a presentation for the symposium. So Jess Clark is the Director of Sexual Violence Prevention for the New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs, a transgender education consultant, and the host of Both and, a sexual violence prevention podcast. His work over the last decade has focused on exploring queer and trans masculinities as sites of violence prevention, and supporting organizations in better serving transgender communities through policies, best practices, and learning to be like his grandma. Byrixon Henderson is Danae from Shiprock, New Mexico. He is the Mental Health and Disabilities Coordinator for PMS Children's Services. He has a background in early childhood education. He is an advocate for families and, most importantly, for children. We had Marisol Treviso Carlos, who is a former home visitor and firstborn participant. She has many years of experience in supporting families of diverse backgrounds and loves to see her community thrive. Andreas Latopolsky is first-generation American and a social worker with 30 years of experience and a commitment to the well-being of children and families. She has worked with Firstborn and More, home visiting for 6 years. And there's me, Mireya Shoemaker. I was a Firstborn and More home visitor for 4 years. I'm a first-generation American, and both of my parents immigrated to the US from Mexico. So overall, I think we tried to, like I said earlier, find a review committee that represented the communities that we serve as best as possible. And from the feedback that we got in our conversations, you can really tell how everybody just viewed it from a different lens. And that was our process. So that was it. Andrea will speak further later on the findings from our conversations, our takeaways. But before we get into that, we wanted to do a little breakout activity to break up our 45 minutes we have together. And we're going to take 5 to 7 minutes. And we have downloaded some pieces of curriculum. We're going to do 3 groups of 5. And I would like for you to take this. I think Andrea is also dropping a PDF of this sample scorecard. And the 2 statements we're looking at right now are that the curriculum acknowledges and/or incorporates the expertise of diverse communities, their cultures, and their historical and/or contemporary experiences. The curriculum has photos, pictures, names, scenarios, and text that reflect the experiences and interests of parents of color in our community. And our goal here is just to share with you all a little bit of our process in this little simulated activity. You'll have 2 pieces of curriculum. If you are in an even breakout room, which you'll know here soon, you get the PDF that says even numbers. If you're in an odd number, get the odd curriculum, and you can just download both right now if you can. That way you're ready for whichever one. And if you could just take a look with your group and just scope it out and see if you can find concrete examples of these statements being supported through our curriculum. And before you do that, if you guys want to decide, sometimes it's hard to decide who's going to go first, who's going to kind of facilitate or start talking. You can all compare who woke up at what time today, and whoever woke up the latest today is your group's facilitator for this exercise. So early bird wins today on not having to facilitate your small group. Tekla's nodding because she probably wakes up really early.
I was gonna say people win by waking up late and then lose by having to facilitate, maybe. But just do grab everything you can out, because not everyone, is in a place. I can see Natani needs to jump on a different device. That's fine. We're hoping that we are mixing you up in a way that people who know how to download easily out of the chat can. Those who are not sure or aren't on a good device, hopefully you'll have comrades there to help you. And Andrea and Mireya will be moving between the groups to kind of facilitate things and make sure you know what you're up to. And so we'll also be providing you some support.
But if I can just jump into, before we go to the groups, don't worry so much about the actual scoring numbers. I mean, if you get to the scoring, that's great, but it's really more just about conversation around how you feel. Does the piece of curriculum really meet the intention, right? How do those statements there apply to the pieces of curriculum, or the piece of curriculum that you're looking at? That's really what we're after here. And then we'll come back together and you can put your thoughts in the chat, any feedback that you have, and we'll talk about it.
Great. I see some people are logging back in, so I'll just go ahead and
Yeah, you can rework the groups, take the
Yeah,
time
I'll
you
rework
need,
the group.
right? And
Yeah.
I think some of the folks who are here, and we're so happy to have folks who support us here. We've got people from marketing, from our website design. It's just wonderful. I think you all are staying with me in the main group, and we'll talk here. And
Okay.
then other folks.
Yes, if you are one of the marketing folks, I think I accidentally might have assigned you to a room, so just don't go into the room.
Unless
All
you
right.
want to.
Unless you want to. Yeah, here we go. I'll open up the rooms.
Thanks, Mira.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for, oh, I'm making sure I'm muted. Okay. Participating in this activity. I hope you all got a chance to get a taste of our process and to kind of see what we're aiming for, whether whether your piece of curriculum met those statements or was a good, it uplifted those statements of representation, or maybe it fell short. That was the process that we followed to hopefully make some meaningful changes in the curriculum so our community feels represented and we are doing some culturally responsive work. So I will turn this to, and if you thought of something that you'd like to share in the chat, please feel free to just drop it in the chat. We'd love to hear your feedback on this activity and on how you thought that the curriculum met or didn't meet that cultural responsiveness. So I am going to turn it over to Andrea now, and she will let us all know about the results of our process.
So thanks. If we can go to the next slide. So I can just speak just very briefly on behalf of our group. I know that we ran out of time. We could have used more time there to talk about it, but which is a similar thing that happened in the process that we undertook. This is one of the things that we learned is this is a really lengthy process. And so I want to talk a little bit about sort of what the outcome was of the overall process from our group. We had a really dedicated committee that looked at a lot of curriculum, many pieces of curriculum. And they each spent time individually reviewing pieces of curriculum. And then we all came together as a group, the 5 of us, to share our recommendations, our thoughts, our ideas. And we really had some very rich conversation with a lot of meaningful feedback when we dug into this curriculum. I mean, you all just got a 5-minute taste of that. And you can see that it does take time to dig into this. We listed out everybody's thoughts and ideas and suggestions. And Tekla's bringing up a really good point, which is that everyone that we recruited for that group had extensive experience with the Firstborn curriculum, right? And so already knowing it ahead of time was a huge help, but it still took so much time for all of us. What we did when we came together is we put all of these thoughts, we sort of listed everything out, and then we took a step back and we looked at we identified the common themes in the feedback, right? There were certain ideas that we heard over and over again from everybody in the group. And this may have just happened in your small breakout room. You may have noticed that several of you were sort of noticing the same thing about the piece of curriculum you were looking at. And when our large group, when our committee, once we got all those ideas down on paper, there were certain ideas that kind of rose to the top because we realized right away that everybody was really having the same thoughts, same feelings. And so knowing that we weren't going to be able to address every single idea that the group came up with, we wanted to sort of figure out how can we best utilize our resources to make the most meaningful impact and change. And so we looked at sort of the 2 or 3 ideas that kind of rose to the top. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll look at what those were. So this first one is kind of exactly what just came up in my small group, right? This idea of increasing cultural and social representation in examples, scenarios, and photos used in the curriculum. So, you know, within the sections of the curriculum, we have photos, right, of babies, of parents, of families. And one of the things, for example, that we discussed was that the Firstborn Model Office has a great library of photos of actual firstborn families. And why don't we use those photos more, right? Because the idea here is that we want this to be relatable and relevant to our families across New Mexico and everywhere actually that's using the firstborn curriculum. And so using photos of actual firstborn families is one great way to do that. Another example is, so with that piece on nutrition that we were just looking at, right? One of the ideas was that we discussed was, how about, you know, making sure that there are foods representative there of various different cultures and different groups of people across New Mexico, so that when parents are looking at a piece of curriculum, they see names of foods and photos of foods, as came up, that again are relevant and relatable, things that they recognize, things that are foods that they would feed to their baby. So really going through and looking at curriculum that our curriculum and finding ways to insert examples, scenarios, and photos that really broaden cultural and social representation. The second recommendation that came up was to ensure that each piece of curriculum includes at least 2 reflective questions. We all know that at the heart of home visiting is the opportunity for parents and home visitors to come together to share and talk about and reflect on a parent's own lived experience, right? And how that impacts their parenting and their family life. And so as we have as a goal that we want to make sure that every piece of our curriculum does include reflective questions. And one thing we realized is that we have fallen short on that, right? So, you know, the idea here is that if we ensure that every single piece of curriculum has at least 1 or 2 reflective questions, it does several things, right? It allows us to center a parent's experience, right? And really elevate that experience. It also emphasizes the fact that many of the challenges that parents face, they're not specific to an individual, but they're reflective of the larger picture, right? That they're an outcome of social and structural beliefs, attitudes, policies, and realities. So we're pulling away from this sort of shame and blame kind of thing, right? And recognizing that a lot of what families are looking at and dealing with is really reflective of a broader picture. And finally, you know, including those reflective questions elevates a parent's experience and allows the curriculum to be representative and respectful and inclusive of a really broad audience without having to make sure that every single piece of curriculum includes specific examples that are reflective of every community, because that wouldn't be possible, right? But by really focusing on what each individual's parents' experience is, we really can tailor it, again, to make it relatable and relevant. The final recommendation that they suggested, that our group suggested, was creating this master list of materials and books that would sort of serve 2 purposes. It would help home visitors better prepare for their visits and be more efficient in their work, but it would also help parents recognize the accessibility of items called for in our curriculum, and again, help them realize that a lot of those things are readily available in their homes, making the curriculum, again, relatable and relevant. We're looking forward to moving forward with some of these recommendations. A few just outcomes and observations that we wanted to just touch on here, right? So we completed 35 scorecards that reviewed about 175 pieces of curriculum. And for those of you who were able to join our session on Monday, where Tekla and Jitter and Vanessa talked about including parents in the development of curriculum, they also highlighted the fact that our curriculum hasn't always been developed that way. and that the original sections of our curriculum were developed using a different model by one person, basically, with a lot less input. So we find that those are the sections of the curriculum that we really want to begin with and focus on when reviewing and revising our curriculum. We would have liked to have slowed down the process and have more time, right? As with all of this, we're even running out of time in our session here today. Hopefully you guys can stay on for a few minutes because I'm going to run over a few minutes here. But we had so much to say about this. Our committee really would have liked to have had more time to do that. And one of the things that we would do next time is to shorten that scorecard a little bit so that we could really target, right, the statements that we're using. This is not a validated tool that we used because when we adapted it for our purposes, right, it became something that, as Mireya mentioned, was really just a jumping off point for some really rich conversation. Two last things that I just want to mention, outcomes and observations I think that Mireya made about this process. Before assigning the curriculum, our staff, our program staff debated what's the best way to do this. Do we have everybody look at the same pieces of curriculum together, or do we assign each individual different pieces of curriculum to review? And we at the time thought that based on our time constraints, that it would be more efficient if we assigned each individual separate pieces of curriculum. Looking back at that now, we kind of think of it a little differently. And we think that if we were going to do this again, if and when we're able to do this again, we'd actually have the group score the same pieces of curriculum together, right? Because you'd get more viewpoints on the same pieces of curriculum so that it would allow us to go deeper rather than broader. And one final thing that we noted was that it was clear to us that Mireya and I tended to rate pieces of curriculum much higher than everybody else. And we really wonder, is that our bias, right? Because of our relationship to the curriculum, our attachment to the curriculum, and that going forward, would we have a more objective review if we had a committee made up entirely of external reviewers? So in the end, I would just like to close by saying we're really pleased with the process. We got some terrific feedback from our reviewers. We have a lot of work ahead of us, and we're really excited to take those suggestions and really start applying them to the curriculum as we can, because we're really excited, as Tekla mentioned at the beginning, to rethink how some of our curriculum was written when it's been updated over the years, but it's time to apply a new lens to it, right? An equity lens. And we're really excited to start that process. So I'll stop there if you want to stop sharing, Mireya. And I know that we're sort of at our time and over, but if anybody has any questions, we would love to answer them. And we really appreciate you joining us. And we're excited to be on this journey. Let me jump into the chat here. Or come off mute and share your questions.
Yeah, and acknowledging time, if people need to jump off, that's totally fine too. And we will stay on if there are comments or additional thoughts people want to share out loud or in the chat.
I have a thought, sort of a question. Andrea, what was your process for recruiting your committee, your review committee, or was it? I mean, I'm not sure how it went, but the reason I ask is because you said, well, maybe if we weren't on the review committee, our results could look different. Which I love the idea of trying to get diverse people in on the review. But I was just curious how you went about that.
No, thank you. That's a great question. So I think we were looking at a couple of things. We wanted to make sure that the people that we recruited already had some knowledge and experience with the curriculum, because that would be an almost insurmountable hurdle, I think, if you were starting with somebody who knew nothing about this curriculum. Right. So we were looking at people who had experience with the curriculum, either as professionals or as themselves parents. And then beyond that, we were really looking for people who were really represented a diverse population, right? And so New Mexico is such a diverse place, as we know. And so we were looking for a variety of different things, right? Sort of geographic diversity, gender diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, knowing that we wanted to keep the committee somewhat small because it's
Sure.
hard to do this with a really large committee.
Oh, I-
And we were also limited, we were a little bit limited by time. As I mentioned, we felt a little bit rushed. So we were sort of thinking about, wanting to do this in the most meaningful way. How could we get people who have a passion for Firstborn and are willing to dive into this, and are familiar with the content and representative of the diversity, the rich diversity that we have here in New Mexico. So we all sort of started throwing names in the pot, like, what about this person? What about that person? And we sort of collectively went through and talked to a variety of people and saw, to see who's interested, who's available, who'd like to join us.
Well, and I think one thing we forgot to mention in our presentation that's really important for this, and a reason why the tool maybe wasn't tailored as well as it could have been, that we can work on that, is that, as we know, anybody who's in home visiting, the curriculum is just supplementary to the work the home visitor does. And really the inclusivity and the equity and all of that, like so much of that is held by the home visitor and in their skill of being culturally responsive, of being, the person to pose the reflective questions that, in the nature of having a reflective question, you are bringing in the community's viewpoint into the program. And having people that knew the nature of home visiting, I think, was really important because of that piece, because we know how much the home visitor, elevates the curriculum.
Yeah, and I was the one who decided, like, we're just going to kind of pick folks. I think if I were going to do this in an ideal way, we would revise the scorecard again, right? We did one revision. I knew this wasn't going to be the last time. I was like, let's just get started, because there's times when I'm using the curriculum or I'm training with the curriculum and I'm like, ooh, a little cringy. Like, I thought I'd made that better. Like, how do we miss that in our first edits in 2019? We need to really work on that. So if I'm cringing, I can just imagine, people are out there going, oh, I really don't use that piece of curriculum, or I don't feel that comfortable with it. So I was like, let's just get started. And really some of the folks so Mireya and Andrea work with the model office as contractors, but really another person on that team did. Other folks have, like, 2 people had maybe 1 to 2 years experience with the curriculum. Everyone else had like 4 to 5 in different capacities. So because it's such a big curriculum, we didn't want to overwhelm anybody. And so we did pick people, we handpicked people in a way, right? I mean, in an ideal way, probably we'd have a revised scorecard with fewer, not an ideal, but like the next step, because I'm really happy with what we did. I think we're in a learning process, and my feeling about all this is like, I'd rather get started and do something and make some improvements and then do it again. So we did that. I would change the scorecard. I would open it up in a more completely open way, probably still to people who knew the curriculum, but like send it out to parents, send it out to other staff folks, like actually do more of like an application process or some kind of a thing like that would have been great to do next time. And I'm really happy with the folks that were willing to do it and kind of be our test group. So just acknowledging that it was basically like us picking people this time. Yeah.
And what I appreciate about this is that it was step 1 of this process, right? It was just, let's just get this started, right? Because I was so excited about the conversation that we had with the committee. I mean, I thought that they all brought so much to it. I thought, the tool was fine, but above and beyond the tools, what it allowed the group to get to. Yeah. Rebecca.
Oh, I just want to say that I'm so excited about hearing that this process is happening. It sounds very familiar to like continuous quality improvement projects, where they're just these short bursts of improving a piece of, whatever it is in that program that the staff or the families feel is most important. And it's great to see that is happening, because, over time, communities change, values change, as a society. So I'm sure doing this 10 years ago would have looked totally different, and you would have come with different recommendations and outcomes. And then what's really great is having the flexibility and the power to be able to do this again and again so that it's really responsive to the families that are being served. So just I'm totally jazzed about this. I really commend you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay.
And I know we're running out of time, but I just wanted
Yeah.
to circle back to Ruth. Ruth, did you want to say a follow-up or did you have an additional question? I wanted to make sure we attended to what you were saying.
Yes, everything was lovely and beautiful. I just wanted to say, my question wasn't inspired by a sort of a question. Wasn't questioning your methods. I was
Yeah.
really impressed by the outcomes and everything that you were able to achieve in that, like Rebecca said, that short burst of energy. But I'm looking forward to see the further iterations for sure. But applauso.
Thank you.
Good on you
Thank you.
guys.
Our work is just beginning. We're excited about it. So, all right. Well, we're definitely over time at this point. So thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you
us.
so much.
And this afternoon, 3 p.m. Mountain Time will be our next presentation with Victoria Rowenhorst from Explora. And she is going to do a fun session on physics with kids. So join us for some fun. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.